Hello, it's Scott Manley here. It's 20th of October. I have had a busy week between Starship and Titan submersible stuff, but it is time to really catch up on a lot of news with the deep space updates. And again, we're going to rewind and look at the various launches that happened in the last couple of weeks. So we've had 6 Starlink launches. That is a sick number of fingers in there, right? So we've had 3 from Vandenberg, 3 from the East Coast. So Vandenberg, there was the 3rd, the 8th, and the 19th. And East Coast Slick 40 was 7th October, 16th of October, and 19th of October. And the Vandenberg launch is important because that is now 10,000 Starlink satellites that have been launched by SpaceX. That is a ridiculous number. Also, this actually happened, I think, pretty much on the same day. The Department of the Air Force and everyone approved SpaceX's proposal to double its launch rate at Vandenberg. That should let them launch like up to 100 times per year out of there using a second launch pad. Now, for the rest of the far more interesting launches, over in China on the 11th of October, we had Gravity 1 from Orion Space launching Jilin 1. Shutiexing and 01 and 02, they were all going to a sun-synchronous orbit. These launched from like the Yellow Sea launch platform thing. Basically, these are all part of commercial LEO, sensing business, right? So they're basically spy satellites providing imagery. 13th of October in China, we have a Long March 2D launching Xi'an 31 from Jichuan. Now, this was a super secret satellite launch that nobody had any inclination it was going to happen. There were minimal NOTAMs, not much info. We certainly have no clue about what the satellite is doing, although it's probably a reconnaissance satellite. But apparently the locals knew enough because Chinese amateur photographers on the ground, they have some great footage, amateur tracking shots showing it rising, and someone figured out the launch trajectory so they could get it flying in front of the sun with beautiful, silhouette filters and everything, so you can see the pressure waves and everything coming off of that. So good on that. Good on you for delivering this amazing content. 13th of October also was a little mission called Starship Flight 11, and of course I have a whole video on that. And I described this in the best possible way as being refreshingly boring. Right, it was basically a repeat of the previous flight. They pretty much managed all their mission goals. Everything was successful. There wasn't any problems with the panels, the fins failing in any way. No accidental explosions. Now there were tiles falling off during the landing. There were, well, some of the landing footage very clearly shows that there was a big hole in the oxygen tank, and there may well have been a hole in the methane tank. Also, interestingly, despite it not having the metal tiles, which were blamed for the orange color, there's still some very obvious orange color emanating from like a V position forward near where the methane tank would be. So again, maybe it could be something else that's causing that, but regardless, it was a very successful flight, and now they're moving in to demolish the launch mount or modify the launch mount so that they can start building the new V3 version that hopefully will be launching next year, and that will hopefully be finally going to orbit, at least a couple of launches time. 14th of October, we had a Falcon 9, which wasn't launching Starlink low Earth orbit, communications internet constellation. Instead, it was launching Kuipersat's low Earth orbit internet communications constellation from Slick 40. This is the 3rd launch of that constellation by Falcon 9. There's like a few other launches by Atlas 5. They're now up to like 150 satellites in orbit, and once Vulcan and New Glenn get going, they're going to be really pushing up a lot more satellites per launch. That was 24 satellites on that, by the way. Anyway, much smaller rocket, Electron Rocket Lab, in a mission called Owl New World, which is not one of their better puns, but I'll give it to them. This launched a satellite called Strix 5 for Synspective, a synthetic aperture radar provider out of Japan. They went into sun-synchronous orbit from Mahia in New Zealand. So this is like the 7th launch of this particular constellation. And unrelated, by the way, the Japanese space agency, JAXA, actually announced that they're planning to launch some new satellites on Electron as well, which is interesting. I think they're waiting for their the next version of their Lambda to be ready, and it's delayed, so they're switching it over to Rocket Lab. 15th of October, out of Vandenberg, we had a Falcon 9 launching another low Earth internet constellation for the military. Well, actually, I don't know what it is, but it's the Space Development Agency's Transport Layer 1, Tranche 1, which I think is a military communication satellite in low Earth orbit. Now, interestingly, they did the usual military Space Force thing of, it's the second stage, we're cutting the camera feed, so you can't see what's going on, you can't see what's on board, you can't tell where it's going. Secrets, right? Well, except that actually we knew exactly where it was going because we have the NOTAMs, we know what orbit it's going to based on the timings of everything, and they published a photo of all the satellites inside the fairing, so we pretty much know exactly what they're looking at. I don't know what they're hiding. You guys are just trying to make it look like it's secret, but it's not really that secret. 16th of October, Long March 8A launched 9 Guowang satellites, another low Earth orbit internet constellation. This is also, I believe, the 600th launch of a Long March rocket. 17th of October, Long March 6A launching the Tianfan 18, which is part of the Thousand Sails low Earth internet constellation, launching into polar orbit from Taiwan. Yes, yeah, everybody is launching parts of their LEO communications constellation right now. 19th of October, we have Kinetica 1. That's one of those sort of smaller, private-ish things. It launched 3 satellites. It launched PRSC-HS1 and AirSat 3 and 4. Now, PRSC is from Pakistan, PR, right? And HS means that it's hyperspectral, so this is like a hyperspectral imaging satellite going into, I believe it's going into low Earth orbit. And AirSat 3 and 4, those are X-band, synthetic aperture radar satellites. I think they can manage a resolution of something like 1 meter. So on the 23rd of October, this morning, we had a Long March 5 launch from Wangchang carrying a TJS-20 into geostationary orbit. So TJS is Tongxing Jishuxian, which is a communication technology test satellite for Chinese military program. Basically, they say it's going to be investigating, verifying multiband high-speed satellite communications technology from geostationary orbit. One other relevant launch that you probably don't care about, but I want to include, is Blue Origin launched New Shepard 36. That is their 6th launch of humans this year, and there was one person that chose to remain anonymous until afterwards, but then they published his name, so I don't need to name everyone on this. Okay, and so moving on to news elsewhere. Well, on the NASA front, it's actually pretty quiet in general because, well, NASA is shut down along with the rest of the US government. Not much is happening. The parties haven't come up with a compromise which satisfies enough people to get 60 votes in the Senate, which is what is required. So apparently we're still waiting for that to go through. There are other political moves going on. For example, there's been some letters written, articles written, discussions trying to somehow intercept the funding, stop the ridiculous plan to take a space shuttle and chop it up into small pieces so it could be transported down from Washington to Texas, where fewer people will be able to see it and where it is now damaged. Yeah, Mark Kelly is one of the people that was put his name to a letter on that. In funding, Stoke Space, they have got another $500 million in investment. So that's brought its total investment to something like $1 billion, or at least that's how much capital they have access to. This is, Stoke, they're obviously trying to build a fully reusable vehicle, a bit like Starship, but actually completely different and much smaller, therefore much more sensible. But, they've been doing great stuff. They've been showing off their transpiration-cooled shield, etc., and they have a bit more money to make it happen. NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory, bad news out of there is that they're laying off another 550 employees. And, this is nothing to do with the government shutdown. It just happens to be at the same time, right? These cuts were planned anyway. This is the 4th round of job cuts in the last 2 years, and the facility has lost like 1/4 of its workforce. It's not shut down technically because Caltech runs the facility, so it's not like a government thing, but government funds a lot of operations at JPL, and there's a bunch of things that have really led to JPL losing a lot of funding that it planned for. It was planning to be working on the Mars Sample Return project, and they had their plan for that, which involved a big international collaboration, and it was going to be very expensive. But JPL had to ramp up and hire a lot of people so that it could do this. And now that's not happening in any form, or not in the form that needs JPL to have that many workers. Some of those people are getting let go. Anyway, it's unfortunate, but we'll see. Where NASA ends up. There are big threats to NASA funding throughout the whole stack. Let's say. Impulse Space, they have announced that they're developing a lunar lander. Okay, of course, Impulse Space is Tom Muller's company. He's the guy that developed the original Merlin engines, and they have been developing kick stages, which can take satellites up to geostationary orbit. Well, they published this article saying, look, we think there is a gap in lunar lander capabilities. There's the small ones that can land like up to maybe a few hundred kilograms. There's the big ones like, what Blue Origin's building that can land like tens of tons. And so they think that they are going to be building a 3-ton capable lander using like the Helios kick stage to get it to the moon. And then they've got their own in-house lander that they want to develop to land stuff. So they think they'll be able to fly this a couple of times a year and deliver payloads. This is not going to need any in-space refueling. It's just going to sit on top of a regular rocket, presumably a Falcon 9, given that they're an extensive relationship with SpaceX. Not landing on the moon, but going to the moon is Artemis 2, and the Orion spacecraft just arrived at the Kennedy Space Center. It's now at the Vehicle Assembly Building, getting ready to be stacked on top of the rest of SLS. Now, this has been part of multiple delays, obviously, to get this here, but now it looks like we're looking at February 2026 for this flight to take place. But for Artemis 3, well, Sean Duffy basically has decided to reopen the HLS development contracts again. And remember, he is still acting administrator. And by the way, the previous decision that NASA should go with SpaceX and Starship was also made by an acting administrator before Bill Nelson came in. But at the very least, this does open the possibility of switching Artemis 3 to like Blue Origin's lander if it's ready in time. But it also sounds like Blue Origin have a separate fast track lander option that they're trying to sell NASA on, where they basically take Blue Origin or Blue Moon Mark 1 and they sort of assemble them in some way that gets them delivers a less capable lander in a shorter time span. It also sounds, by all odds, that Lockheed might have some plans that they're trying to pitch NASA on. Now, we're not really sure how this works with funding and everything like this, but Sean Duffy has definitely been trying to make a lot of noise about beating China back to the moon. And we're now seeing news stories that there is something of I wouldn't say a struggle going on, but there's some movement back and forth on who should be the administrator next. And Jared Isaacman's name is still in the running. He's been out and talking to various senators and people within Trump's cabinet and whatnot, finding the allies that he has, and making a case that he would still like to be NASA administrator and he's better qualified. And honestly, reading an article today, it very much sounds like Sean Duffy wants to take NASA and just roll it into the Department of Transport so that he gets all the credit, gets its budget, and then can siphon it off into whatever projects he wants. Basically, he wants to kill NASA. And we have Jared, who wants to colonize the solar system. Now, that may seem like a bit of oversimplification or exaggeration, depending how you want to look at it, but that is really the quality of the memes that this particular political situation is evoking. And Elon Musk has approached this in his usual manner by rebranding Sean Duffy as Sean Dummy, comparing his tree-climbing abilities on television to Jared's spacewalk. I don't know how this is going to end, but I would really like to see a competent person running NASA. Okay, either way, NASA is still very much shut down right now, so there's no sign of anything happening very soon. One of the early employees at SpaceX, Hans Koenigsmann, you might have heard of him. He started out doing avionics. He was involved in all the accident reports, all the incidents. He has left the company a couple of years ago, but he is now going to fly to space on Blue Origin. And the interesting thing is, he's actually flying to be with a friend, Michaela Benthouse, who was like a mountain biker, and then she had a terrible accident in 2018 that basically broke her back, and she is now confined to a wheelchair. Wants to go to space. People are funding this flight, and he's coming along because he wants to basically be, the person to make sure she gets into the seat and everything. He's gonna fly along to experience it and then also to help his friend. And I think that's a wonderful idea. Yes, you don't really need your legs in space. This will be the first wheelchair user to go to space, and it makes total sense, and I can't wait to see this actually happen. So yeah, Axiom. Yes, well, Axiom, if you remember 6 months ago, they got rid of their CEO and replaced it with a new guy who had brought in like $1 billion worth of investment. Well, yeah, that guy, Tipal Bhutia, he is out, and he's been replaced by Dr. Jonathan Sirtan. Yeah, I don't know. I'm starting to get worried about Axiom. They have a lot of fingers and a lot of pies between the spacesuits, between the private astronaut missions, and of course, the private space station. And I'm wondering if they have enough money to actually keep all these things running. So yeah, the new guy he's like a former astrophysicist. He was like a executive at some nuclear company, and he was at NASA and everything as well. I'm hoping that the Axiom can at least keep some of the projects on track. The one that's really important, of course, for Artemis is the spacesuits. In fact, it's important for everything because now they're the only spacesuit provider. I mean, there is a future in which things go really wrong at Axiom, and we end up with astronauts using SpaceX suits on the surface of the space of the moon. Yeah, I'm not sure if we're there just yet. A cool little paper came out over the weekend from researchers at the University of California, San Diego, and University of Maryland, and they basically showed how to build like a very, very cheap geostationary satellite communications, like listening system. And they pointed at all the transponders of all the satellites they could see, and they found, to their surprise, that there was quite a lot of unencrypted traffic still going over these very, very public satellite links. And we're not talking about like hackers that were bouncing stuff between like old military satellites. This is popular in Brazil and Russia and stuff like that. These old satellites, they never really shut down. They're still being used. No, this is like, they actually found commercial organizations. I actually found US government organizations sending clear text internet protocol over it. They found like T-Mobile, US military, and then there was a lot of Mexican companies like Walmart Mexico and a number of other providers were like doing cell phone backhaul unencrypted over geostationary communications. And this team built a listening system for something like $700. Now, I know I've done a whole video, a whole series on communication satellites, and frankly, I had thought that by now people were smart enough to be encrypting their stuff end to end, but apparently that is not the case. This morning, 3 of Europe's largest aerospace companies have announced that they're agreeing to combine their space businesses into one joint venture. Airbus, Leonardo, Thales, they made the announcement this morning, and this covers things like satellite launch, space facilities, space services. But as far as I understand it, it doesn't include any of the launch stuff, so it doesn't include Airbus's contributions to Ariane, for example. Now, in theory, these groups together merged into like Europe Space Voltron will account for maybe $7 billion worth of revenue if they continue, and that will make them a pretty major player once they figure out what this space venture is actually called. A small company in California named Apex Space, a small company in California, unveiled Project Shadow, which purports to be a space-based interceptor for missile defense. While Congress is trying to figure out how to fund Golden Dome and make sure all their lobbyists are kept happy, this private company in California has decided to just build a missile defense system demonstrator on its own. So they're going to have their Nova platform, which will be outfitted with a magazine, containing a number of small solid rocket motor based interceptors. They're going to launch this next year. They're going to perform in space demonstrations, which, on one hand, that sounds pretty cool, but also it could potentially raise a number of flags regarding, potential for space debris and stuff. It looks like the test is designed to avoid this. This is mostly just to demonstrate that they can, in fact, fly interceptors and move them with precision into a specific region. But it's interesting that private companies are getting private funding to do this thing, which the US government is sort of saying will cost a ridiculous amount of money, and it will cost a ridiculous amount of money. It's always more difficult to shoot missiles down with another missile than it is to just shoot a missile. And now, finally, we have two stories about space debris. So, you might have seen the video that I posted a couple of days ago about space debris potentially hitting a plane. Well, we have the answer to what that actually was. Also, around the same time, there was a large piece of space debris which landed in Australia. And that was like a fuel tank, composite overwrapped pressure vessel or something. It was still smoldering and burning when it landed, leaving smoke in the air. Well, we've now confirmed that that is probably a fourth stage of a Geelong rocket, which was launched like in September. It remained in a low orbit and probably finally deorbited just over the weekend. Now, the space debris hitting a plane situation, that is a whole interesting story. Again, I have a very long video on that, which I looked at the various possibilities, and I was skeptical of the notion there was actually space debris because we didn't know of anything which would match up with it. I didn't think it could be a meteorite because meteorites would be hard and dense and would make a lot bigger mess of that aircraft if it happened. But we've now actually figured out, unfortunately, well, fortunately, we figured out what it is. It's not the cool story about space debris. It is a weather balloon by a private company called Windborne Systems. They've been launching this to build a high-resolution weather database that they can sell to customers. And they carry their instrument below it. The balloon remains airborne for multiple days, and it is able to control its altitudes either by releasing gas or by releasing ballast. And the ballast is in a kilogram of sand, and it can slowly release that. Well, that is what hit the plane. That's why some of the surface actually looks like it's been polished, I think, because it's effectively been sandblasted. So that has been confirmed by it's been confirmed by one of the people that founded the company, but the NTSB has yet to confirm this. So yeah, it's still possible they come to a different conclusion. The real question now is, well, how do we make sure that this doesn't happen again? But that is not a space story. That's a plane story, and this is Deep Space Update. So I'm going to say my farewells for now. Keep watching the skies. I'm Scott Manley. Fly safe.